There you are.
Welcome to Steinway & Sons.
Fantastic.
Very nice to see you here again, and I hope the session recording this morning goes well.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours.
Wow, great space.
We are in a house of pianos, but we are in Steinway Hall today instead of our home. And we have Professor Morgan Hayes from Royal Academy of Music. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start us off with a little bit about you and your work.
Oh yes, so I was composing music probably from about the age of 6, 7. The initial stimulus for that would have been my mum's record collection, so it was a bit listening to music. It was the starting point. Also, my dad at that time was fixing pianos, so I grew up in a household of pianos. But principally, I would say it was this record collection, which was maybe about this. So the advantage there that you get to know a few pieces very well, rather than multitude of possibilities. So I count myself as fortunate in that respect.
Was it standard classical repertoire?
Mixed. Funny enough, the first one I read was music from the Greek islands on Classics for Pleasure.
How appropriate.
I remember that along with. I'm not.
Yes, it is.
I think that could be. That's the one. It was a two-album. That would have been my first one, along with Beatles, Abbey Road. Here Comes the Sun, and then classical rep would. Nothing outlandish, but at the time it will, of course, wonderful Iron Klein and Natalie music, Beethoven violin concerto, Bach, Brandenburg, Beethoven pastoral. So it was nice. It was a great starting point. Piano lessons, schools, which obviously did actually have music departments, singing assemblies, and such things. Trombone lessons at school, trumpet lessons. So although none of this is, it is all part. It's part of it was stimulating and musically important.
And just because this is quite the topic nowadays, you're not talking about a private school, are you?
No, Hillcrest School is, I think it's an academy, I believe.
No,
right.
That's not, and East Sussex, crucially, had a very good, maybe it still does, a very good music provision. So there was a composer's course which I attended as a teenager, and wonderful people coming in, giving talks, Judith Weir, Robert Saxton, and people like that. So I mean, all of these things were truly incredible.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, found the home was a supportive one, a stimulating one, and all that, but that alone would have probably just taken me so far.
It extended outside the house.
Absolutely, yes. Hastings still does have a very good music festival, very good competitive music festival.
Yes.
Very piano.
I think it's a piano concerto.
Exactly, yes. So we had wonderful adjudicators adjudicating the composition course, composition class. So that would have been initially Yonty Solomon, who was incredibly encouraging, and next to Ronald Smith, the great Alcon pianist. So incredible. And then on top of that, the great fortune of studying with David as well. So
from what age? David Branson.
David would have been from about the age of 12 or 13. Probably about 12, 13, but I knew him. I was maybe just slightly before that, so actually being exposed to somebody who was actually a composer. Albeit quite an older generation, he was born in 1909.
Yes.
So I was studying with him when he was in his late 70s, early 80s.
Did he also kind of cover also theoretical counterpoint harmony education?
He did. He took me through the music theory exams. Though, in fairness, the piano teacher who I had prior to David also was very hot on that. He took me through the Trinity grade, so I'm very thankful for that. David himself had been an associated board examiner.
Oh, that's how
In the
obvious,
village,
obviously.
Yeah.
That would have been from the 60s onwards. And then during, I think, the mid-war years, the interwar years and the war, he broadcast recitals regularly on the
Yes.
World Service.
Yes.
Mm.
He introduced composers like Monpu to the country.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so on. So,
Right.
he's possibly, if he's known for anything at all, it'd be for a book on John Field. And
Oh, he has a book out.
he wrote a book it came out in the 70s, which sort of detailed the exhaustively, maybe too exhaustively, the sort of similarities between the two. So David was something of a polymath
Yes.
in that respect. But it was I think his principal achievements in all would be piano composition,
Right.
visual art. He was a very good painter, and of course an incredible teacher as well.
Fantastic. So
As
he.
opposed to a musicologist, which is ironically probably his where the field and if it's known for anything.
From age of 12 till age.
Till about 18 or 19.
So when you entered senior.
When I was doing there was a prep course in music held in Lewis, kind of A-level course.
Yeah.
So just up to when I was studying at Guildhall, in effect. That's when
Yes.
and then I studied wonderful Hilary Coates
Yes.
piano.
Yes.
Yes.
Who I'm still in touch
Yes.
with sometimes. So,
Yeah.
but David was obviously the first exposure to an actual
Of
living
course.
composer. Not only did the music, it sounded incredible to a very impressionable 10, 11-year-old, but also it looked incredible as well. I mean,
Very,
just
very
as an example,
neat.
just and seeing that kind of thing on the
Yeah.
music desk, when there just all layers of all this sort of, it just amplified, I think, my enthusiasm.
has this jazz and relaxed swing, and some of it is written in, some of it is implied, and it was great fun to play.
I'm glad about that. Yes, I mean, I would say at least 25%, maybe thereabouts of his output is slightly pedagogical
Okay.
in its nature. Very excellent teaching pieces, which were very much appreciated.
Yeah.
The charm of his music.
And is the blues, the duet, pedagogical? Or
I suppose it could be a concert piece. Of course it could, but I suppose it was designed with teaching music festivals in mind. And I was studying with him around about the time.
And you presumably played it with?
I did actually
him
once. Not with. No, he never actually guided me through that one. It was. There was interestingly, there was a time when I was studying piano with David, and I was studying composition with Michael Finnessy. So the two, you couldn't want the two aesthetically different people, really. But they both had very good calligraphy. David, I suppose, essentially a product of some of his teachers, John Ireland, not least.
Probably called it anchored onto 19th century.
Yes.
At least as to the aesthetics, isn't it?
Exactly, yes, I would say so. And some of his interests in Chopin and what was contemporary music to him as he was growing, which would have been. Just he was a French composer, didn't he? He was particularly interested in French music.
How about, since it's the centenary this year, for Busoni? Anything?
Did he ever mention? Did he ever touch? But he was very interested in that tradition. In fact, the first piece by Bach we went through was actually something that was actually existed as it was edited by or somebody off that. It was Tausig
Ah,
That was okay.
right.
The
This is
Prelude,
a
Fugue
piece.
and Allegro, which is better known as a guitar piece.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was
right.
transcribed.
Yeah.
It existed as a piano piece, so
Yeah.
that was one of the that was part of David's repertoire. There's, and he studied piano with Harold Samuel, of course.
Yes.
So again,
Yes. As a general comment, there are two things that I find interesting. That here we are, and you're young, and therefore now we're talking about a teacher who actually has sort of because of 1907, did you say?
and 1909.
1909.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's very easy, isn't it, to actually get linked once removed from the 19th century, actually, if you have old enough teachers, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And also it gives one a perspective on essentially what was new music to him when he was growing up. So look, he included people that would have included Scriabin, Debussy, Fauré, because obviously by the time I was studying with him, had settled into you wouldn't describe it, you wouldn't realistically describe it as modern or new.
Romantic kind of.
Yes.
But for him, that would have, and people like Charvenka even, or what these were.
But
And then, so what would have been modern to me? What was to David's credit? I mean, he I would have taken on things like the Webern variations, Schoenberg,
right.
6 little pieces, and he gladly took me through all of that as well. So
sort of looking
although he was someone of very strong opinions and outlook, he wasn't dogmatic, and he had a kind of freshness of outlook. I remember lending him a cassette of Maxwell Davis Symphony. I mean, he didn't much like it, but he listened to it.
He still must
And I
have
think
found
that-
it, so yeah.
But he was in Burke was sorting on the radio again, completely diametrically opposed to his interests.
How then, I mean, Finisi is much more not much more, he is of the 20th and 21st century. He's
Absolutely. So he's
creating
born 46, so
Well,
so that we're talking about
almost
30,
solid
about 3 decades, yeah.
later than
Yeah,
David,
yeah, yeah.
which partly will account for obviously a different. It's bound to be a different outlook. I think that's an inevitability.
Yeah, I mean, with Finisi must be interesting because what kind of influences did he?
The first composition lesson I had with him, it wasn't just me, it was a lovely friend of mine at the time, Charlotte Glasson. He suggested we listen to Japanese gagaku music and Sibelius' 7th Symphony. And I think those two in a way show something of his breadth of interest and lack and
Well, yes, Sibelius' 7th being quite the exception to the whole cycle, I suppose. It's quite interesting.
Yes, exactly.
The way he orchestrated it.
And the first time was to write something, a very thick texture and then a very
Yes.
transparent was the first task.
Yeah.
I always remember that. And Michael lived in Brunswick Square at the time, Brighton. It was a lovely Regency Square, 48.
So you
Travelled in that time from, I think I travelled from either from Hastings or from Lewis, which is where I was doing which is much nearer by, studying to those lessons. And I only knew that Michael lived in Brighton because of a visit from Judith Weir, the composition course I was.
Right.
So when she said, I've just seen Michael Finisi in Brighton, so that's how that
she
occurred.
recommended for you to
Sort of, but actually initially wrote to Jonathan Harvey who lived in Lewis. But he was too busy. I think he was too busy. And then it just occurred, the name Michael Finisi popped into my head, so I thought it would be, and it turned out to be very inspiring.
You had listened obviously to his output to that point, and you were aware.
But actually, strangely enough, a relatively peripheral awareness of his music. I'd heard Red Earth on the radio.
Yeah.
That would be 1988. But it was a peripheral awareness, not, and so I got to know his music through studying with him. So it was fairly on the chance, sort of choice. And I think the lessons were, as I remember, every fortnight maybe,
Yeah.
which is good.
Yeah.
Composition lessons, you don't need
It's
them.
good,
You
yeah.
don't need weekly composition
Yeah.
lessons. Instrumental lessons. Sometimes ideas will, for example, the violin and piano piece, which was premiered last week.
Ah.
That began. Some of the initial ideas for that began when I was asked to play for some dance classes in Finsbury Town Hall, which is an incredible space. It's Yamaha and it's vast. It truly is. But I didn't want to spend the whole session just improvising or doing whatever came into my head, so I just sketched out some rough ideas to play around with. Eventually, some of that ended up in the violin and piano piece.
Right.
So just from an idea. That's the wrong octave, but it's actually down there. But that all ended up in a more elaborate form. So that became a 12-minute violin and piano piece, in fact. So that's an example of something where the piano was there at the beginning.
Yeah.
But then it's really worked, and then it gets worked on, and it's not one or the other, and then of course there's the notation software as well. So it's a kind of dialogue between.
So you have these stages of
it doesn't have to be one or the other, but just sometimes the initial physicality of the piano was a useful thing.
That's a. I don't want to call this an extra musical source of inspiration because it's dance and it was within the. I'm not quite sure what's your view, but what kind of things might inspire you? Is it all extra musical, or are you thinking always in terms of some kind of inspiration?
Rarely is it extra musical, particularly. It's more fired off by, say, a motif or a situation or a combination of instruments. Violin and piano, immensely challenging in some respect.
Yes.
And take things from there. With that said, obviously the music one writes or the way you play it's a product of so many things that you couldn't necessarily. That might be a book you read or people you know, etc.
Yes.
The personal identity is obviously it's linked entirely, isn't it? We do. I mean, yeah.
How would you characterize your language or the genre?
This particular piece, because it's fresh in my mind, that's in 8 relatively short sections, none longer than about 2.5 minutes. And I think I was interested in the way it's almost like programming a recital in that situation. And if they're not quite in the right order, tensions can drop. Or so I actually at the relatively last moment, reordered the first 3 movements. So 1, 2, 3 became 2, 3, 1. Which I said, but that wasn't immediately apparent.
Was that also taking into account the remaining movements as well?
I think it was certainly 4. Yes, in the way. Yes, absolutely. So it was like this juggling things around. Because the piece had been recorded over the summer, and then so
you had already one.
Yes, I had some sort of, and that was as it happens not recorded in the order the movements were written in. But just listening through to the complete takes, I had this. There was something never quite right about the way 1 went into 2, because I had this set idea in my head about the violin becoming increasingly important, and that sometimes you can get sidetracked by people, and sometimes you don't actually realise it. For example, the harmonic rhythm for the second piece was slower, even though it was busier. So going from the first to it felt like a dip in energy. So it was a very switch in that case. So yeah, that would be the. But no two pieces are the same. And there was one piece I was asked though by a pianist friend of mine who was at Royal Academy Yehuda in Baden, and he wanted me to write a complementary piece to an incomplete sonata movement by Schubert. So obviously that's a
That
very
must be a whole new.
so that has a different set of requirements and way of response than writing a 12-minute violin and piano piece in 8 short.
Did you choose to emulate the style of Schubert? Or
Not the style.
like
I suppose that was
language?
not really. What I did choose in the third section of the piece was to use the same rhythmical outline. So it follows texturally. It looks a lot of it looks the same, but the notes are different. But if you knew both, you would immediately say
There is some kind of a coherence.
yes. It's almost as if Schubert had been brought into had been just transposed into the early 20th century. I would say, and then I put in a few interrupt. So one person said it sounded like Poulenc. But I had in my mind I had maybe Scriabin or Berg perhaps, and then the other rooms, and then so that even that is a sequence of 3 short sections, which ideally should follow on from the very abrupt ending of the Schubert fragment. It literally ends it. He didn't know how to complete it, what have you. So this is, it emphasises that juncture rather than tries to
To provide a conclusion or something like that.
not yes, that wouldn't that would be for a composer with more musicological bent, which isn't really that's the kind of thing probably David Branson would have enjoyed doing, but not or for that matter Michael Phillipsey has written many completions of pieces. Some are in the style of, some are not. So that's unusual to cover that range of terrain, I think.
So, in your career to date, is there some kind of a highlight or something of a project that maybe stood out for you, or something?
There was a violin concerto I wrote for Keisuke Okazaki, who now leads the opera
Is
in
this
Zurich.
published?
Yeah, that's published. And it's on.
Which editions?
That's Stainer and Bell published.
Very good.
Yeah.
Hello. No, we don't play violin.
The other also violin related would be the various pieces I've worked on with Darren Morgan, for example, or a piece for violin and piano called Opera.
There's a lot of violin in
lot.
your
And
output
solo.
there.
Ironically though, some of the most assistance I got on writing violin was from a pianist friend of mine, Stephen Gutman, who has worked a lot with violinists and has some basic knowledge of the violin. So I would, it'd be nice to have a basic lesson, I think. But then I've written a couple of solo violin pieces as well. And then most recently, it was nice to write this new piece with Dara.
So where is this thing coming from for the violin? I'll call it love for the violin.
It can be. I think it can be enjoyable writing for something that is an instrument which you don't actually have a physical knowledge of. I mean, it's all like piano. A lot of the piano writing is quite spare, in my opinion, just a single line.
But
Not
the resonance is different, can envelop the violin.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why, a lot of the first 2, nearly 3 sections of the violin and piano piece are the piano's just on one line.
Yeah.
and mostly in the treble clef. Actually, there aren't many bass notes in the whole piece.
Okay.
For the
So you chose to meet the violin at its range.
yes, and there's one just at the end that they're sort of locked together in a similar register. The other career highlight, I think, was in working with pianist Jonathan Powell.
Yes.
Wrote a large cycle that he premiered in Darmstadt, but not the summer school. Premiered in again a multi-movement. Jonathan and I go back a long time, and I'm looking forward to his recital at Wigmore Hall in November.
Oh, is it?
In November, so just not far from where we are now. So that's
Just around the corner.
yes,
Excellent. Okay.
So this is one of the David's teaching pieces called Hiking Tune from 1930 or thereabouts. Hiking Tune, yeah. So this would have probably been the first piece I ever set eyes on.
you say teaching piece, you mean both in piano and composition, or
Piano,
Right.
essentially. Yeah, these would have been designed, I think, for
because they have
pianos
a
and
no, I like the because both share this the pentatonic.
oh
Thing
yes,
as
well
well.
yes they do, don't they?
And-
Yeah.
Is this one also from the 30s? Is that around
Yeah,
the
they're
same
from
time?
the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. This one ended up in an associated board
Okay.
edition, grade 7 piece. Though it wasn't written specifically for
No,
grade
not at the
7.
time.
Not no. This is obviously more influenced by Branson, I would say.
Oh, yes.
And so on.
Is it a bit like the Mikrokosmos and the Concerto for Orchestra?
Yes, mixed
yeah,
together.
kind of influence, yeah.
Influence.
Yeah,
That was-
odd meters and.
Just to say, that was Prelude number 2.
Prelude number 2.
Yeah.
Branson.
Yeah, Branson. This is a piece from the
The Flung.
Flung spray. This will hear more of the influence of John Ireland in this piece. See if I can- So
Absolutely lovely.
it's exquisite, isn't it? And then this melody comes back again, but more. It's extraordinary.
It intrigues me because it must be quite tricky to when it comes to teaching other students, especially in the academy. Right? Is this the do you suggest these kind of repertoires listening perhaps for them to get more into, or do you just let them more develop their own?
A good
style?
question.
It's quite a long discussion. This one probably.
It's a good question though, because obviously a variety of people
Yeah,
come to you with orientated in very different ways.
probably fixed ideas.
Very different.
probably.
So you would have maybe at one end of the spectrum a more commercially poised students, and then at the other you've got people who are maybe more searching, trying crossing new boundaries, etc. And then you've got all the crisscross in between those. And I think it would be a mistake over a 4-year period, obviously, to spend all your time turning somebody into something which they're clearly
Right.
not.
Yes.
I think, while at the same time, yes, being challenging as well. So I think you've got to be able to read the room.
As
As I say, otherwise, it's not just this one monolithic thing.
I think of it as more tricky than actual instrumental probably teaching
If
for me.
you want to make a comment for young composers, what could they do before the age of 18 if they are thinking about composition? What kind of skills you would really ideally like them to have? Like 4/part harmony, counterpoint, not at all what?
Some skill set in notation, so that I mean, if even if it's just the grade
Grade 5.
the grade or and beyond possibly,
Yes.
but that's going to be invaluable because it can unleash notation can unleash lots of wonderful
Do you
ideas.
actually get students nowadays that don't deal with traditional notation?
Not at the Royal Academy, it has to be said.
Good.
I dare say
Yeah.
it exists. With that said, I love improvisation and
Yeah.
I mean, I've just been really getting into Keith Jarrett.
Ah,
very
I
good.
was always a big fan of his,
Yeah.
It's- but it's something sometimes you put people on the shelf for a bit and then you come
Yeah,
back to it.
yeah.
So that would be one thing. Also, get acquainted with parts of the canon as well. There's no harm in that. Just given the level of interest, the level of influence that
Yeah.
people like, well, this is just the 20th century alone. Schoenberg, Stravinsky,
Yes.
Debussy, Satie. All these, so much has come in the wake of those composers. If you wasn't unaware of them in some way, you're less likely, in a way, to forge an original
Yeah.
language. I think
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
you might just repeat the past without
That's
realising it.
true.
Exactly, yes. We don't want that.
The same applies to history as well. I would say you more like to repeat mistakes from
Yeah, yes.
if you're not aware of.
Yes.
Ignorance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are looking forward to working with you on that CD project.
Yes.
And we're definitely going to be looking at Branson and
Yeah.
some people from
That
that
period,
area.
that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are quite a substantial number of piano duets by David.
Yes.
So
Oh.
that
Really? Because I thought that there are a couple.
there's the piece, it's kind of tone poem about Hastings Winter, called Hastings Winter, which is a
You
kind
said
of
this?
I may have said no.
No.
I'll double check.
Yeah,
That's got a kind of it's like a La Mer of the 21st century.
Oh,
That's quite that. Though I think that was maybe, although it was ultimately intended to be an orchestral piece,
Yeah.
it's certainly worked
Yeah.
better as a piano
Yeah.
duet than a piano solo, which he also transferred. But it's just too much.
Yes, yes,
going
too
on.
much.
Right.
Yes,
He-
yes.
There's the Belgian Tea Party piece that's a kind of conjunction of Vincent Yeomans and Gershwin, and people which is very
So
lively one.
Definitely. We're going
That's
to
a
be
piano
looking
one.
at that.
Yeah.
I didn't know it's a very
So
rich,
soon. Very soon.
interesting generation, really. Composers that have been
Yeah.
partly forgotten.
Until they kick us out,
Yeah.
I'm going to say
Oh, yeah.
that in the last chapter of the PhD that
Oh,
is
yeah.
getting finished.
Oh, right. Wow.
Yes, it has
Yeah.
to be handed in mid-November.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
November. And I am saying that perhaps that we do not talk about the British pianism. It's not exactly accepted. When I came to the country, in fact, I came across certain, it looked like I crossed the boundary by saying British pianism among musicologists. I'm putting forward the idea that perhaps because we don't have an internationally accepted generation of composers like Debussy, which was not just for the French or certain pianist composers that broke out into the international stage. And it is interesting that now Branson comes into this, and it's the same generation, it's the same with Gordon Green, who is the subject of the PhD, more 1905.
And that,
Yeah.
Close
the
to
same,
that,
very
close to
close.
that.
Exactly, very close.
I'm sure
They probably crossed
Very
paths.
close.
They must have. And Alan Rosner was a very close friend. I think one of the two was best man to the other ones, Gordon Green and Alan Rosner. So it's quite interesting. We're talking about the same, and you're here, and you actually have this kind of thing. But how do you react to that idea? Do you agree that it's because in that crossing over to the 1905, well, not as a birth, dates, but actually 1910, 1920s,
Yeah.
let's say that we are missing some key players in composition.
Well, yes, so the tradition of the composer pianist.
Exactly. That's
So there are,
the idea.
which is often said is a tradition that's sort of less common
Yes.
now, but it was in very much live in
Yeah.
action.
Yes.
It would have been unexceptional probably to be
Yeah.
a pianist also put their own pieces
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the program
Yeah.
at that time. But no, that I can well imagine that it needs further
Yeah.
Well,
Looking
yeah,
into.
looking into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Great.
it's been a pleasure, Morgan Hayes.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for the interview. Bye.
Thank you.
Nice to see you both.